We begin tonight in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and a police service once again under fire for how they handled the drowning death of an Indigenous man. A death that investigators should have treated as a potential homicide, but did not. And racism appears to be a reason why. That's the damning conclusion of an independent investigation obtained exclusively by our colleagues at the Fifth Estate. It was launched following the death of 41-year-old Stacey DeBungy. His body found just over 2 years ago in the Northern Ontario City. The case was quickly deemed non-criminal. But in the wake of this scathing review and concerns over how the police investigates cases involving Indigenous peoples, First Nations leaders are calling for the resignation of the Thunder Bay police chief. The Fifth Estate's Gillian Finley is breaking this story for us tonight.
Wow.
It was the chiefs of the Rainy River First Nation who asked for the review of the Thunder Bay Police. The results today have them calling for action.
Leadership, it comes from top down, right? And there's a systemic problem with the Thunder Bay Police Force. So I'm calling for Chief Levesque's resignation. And barring that, I think the police board has to do their job and fire him.
At issue is the police service's investigation into the death of this man. In October 2015, Stacey DeBungy's body was found face down in Thunder Bay's McIntyre River. Within hours before his body had even been identified, police said the death did not appear suspicious. Within a day, even before an autopsy had been conducted, they determined the incident non-criminal, no foul play. But the police's theory that DeBungy had been drunk, his death an accident, never sat right with his older brother, Brad.
How do they figure he got to the water?
They said he rolled into the water. But there was no sign of the weeds being trampled down.
So what did you think?
Like somebody placed him there. Like they just threw him in the water and that'd be it.
The Rainy River First Nation hired a private investigator who shared his work with the Fifth Estate. Our documentary raised serious questions about clues that weren't pursued. Another man's ID that was found near DeBungy's body. The fact his debit card had been used 6 times after his death.
You were one of the last people that was with Stacey, right, that night. Yeah. So what happened to him?
And people who were with DeBungy the night he died, who told us a year later they'd never been contacted by police for an interview.
I'm Gillian Finley.
At the time, Thunder Bay Police Chief J.P. Levesque did not appear concerned.
Have you not gone back to those investigators and said, did you ever ask about the debit card? Did you ever interview these people?
I try not to micromanage. I'll let the investigators do their job.
But the independent review obtained by the Fifth Estate lays out a trail of deficiencies, some of them even more shocking. A witness who told police he'd seen an altercation by the river that night, not contacted for more than a year. The man whose ID was found at the site, red flagged in police computers, but not questioned for months, even though he'd been in police custody twice. And perhaps most disturbing, a report of an alleged deathbed confession, a woman claiming she pushed DeBungy into the river and watched as his body floated away. Again, information not pursued until months later. The deficiencies in the investigation were so substantial, the report concludes, they support an allegation of neglect of duty. And indeed, that is the finding leveled at 3 Thunder Bay officers, including an acting inspector. As to why police would have neglected their duty, it can be reasonably inferred, the report says. It was based on the deceased's Indigenous status.
They kept using the phrase Indigenous. This happened, maybe because of the person was Indigenous that they were investigating. It was because they were Indigenous. So it was a vindication somewhat.
It seems like everybody just being put aside, like, oh, their lives don't matter or whatnot, because they're Indians and Native people and this and that. So just the way that they said that he found him.
Brad DeBungy never believed what police told him, that his brother Stacey drowned here on Thunder Bay's McIntyre River after passing out on the riverbank. Even after his band's counsel hired an investigator and found evidence to the contrary, he couldn't get police to listen.
I was up against a brick wall and they wouldn't answer my questions and this and that. and just how they came to the assumption that he rolled into the water and drowned.
Concerns now confirmed by Ontario's independent police review director, who says police not only jumped to conclusions, they were negligent, overlooking evidence, and possibly discriminatory because of Debungy's Indigenous status. No surprise to Indigenous leaders here.
Somebody made the assumption that it's just another drunk Indian rolling in the river.
Today, chiefs representing northwestern Ontario and Debungy's home First Nation repeated calls for Thunder Bay Police Chief J.P. Levesque to resign. This is not the first time racism has been a central issue in Thunder Bay. Debungy died while there was an inquest underway into deaths of 7 Indigenous youths in Thunder Bay, which resulted in recommendations to police and authorities.
Right? I no longer trust the Thunder Bay Police.
Tonight in Thunder Bay, a community talk at the university on racism, and plenty of acknowledgement of tensions existing in the community.
I see blatant systemic racism every day. I mean, our headlines show it.
It's like everyone has their own personal safety guides of how to survive in Thunder Bay.
Travis Hay's father was once deputy chief of police here, at a time when many are talking about the justice system. In the cases of Colton Bushy and Tina Fontaine, he calls this an example of prejudice.
It really shows that it's not just the court systems, it's not just getting better representation on juries, it's also about challenging these cultures within policing institutions that really devalue the lives of Indigenous peoples.
As for the officers cited in the report, the independent police review director says there are grounds for non-criminal professional misconduct charges. So far, no hearings have been set. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Thunder Bay.
As Cam mentioned, at the time of Debungy's death, an inquest was underway into the deaths of 7 young Indigenous people, 5 of whom had been found in Thunder Bay waterways under similar circumstances. Police were also accused of rushing to the assumption that those deaths were accidents. This latest review calls that troubling, saying one would have reasonably expected that investigators would be particularly vigilant in ensuring that the sudden death of an Indigenous man found in the river was thorough. Unfortunately, the opposite was true here.